Welcome to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. My Lord, it's been a long time.
I don't think I've seen you like in a month.
We've been in these
I have
chairs.
like a calendar and I just check off the day. I'm like, where is Matt Schlapp today?
So,
how was your trip, sweetheart?
to Hungary was
Yes.
amazing. I hope you all got to watch the live stream that came from Budapest. It was an amazing experience to be with basically every country in Europe was there. Conservative parties,
Right.
Conservative nonprofits were there, and it was an amazing thing to behold.
What did you learn when you were there? What was like the one defining moment?
You know, that it would be just catastrophic to be dependent on Vladimir Putin for your energy. And over 60% of their fossil fuel comes from Vladimir Putin through pipelines because they don't have a port, because
Right.
they're bound by land borders. And I think what people don't understand is that the Hungarian people hate the Russian people. You talk about animosities that go back centuries. That part of the world is no different from other parts of the world, where it's not like the countries around Russia who are trying to have some kind of relationship with Putin love Putin. It's just that they have to bow to the realities that they have to get a lot of their staples in life from his government, and most importantly, his fossil fuels. And I find it just so disheartening, repulsive, disgusting to see our government begging Iran, begging Venezuela,
Right.
begging OPEC to produce more. I don't know why one source of energy from a kind of a rogue regime is better than another. And it's the kind of insanity of the Biden administration. But it was a great trip. And our next international CPAC will be down
Just
in
for the
Brazil.
record, I was holding down the fort here at CPAC
Right.
in America,
So
and at the Schlapp household as well.
So the next one's going to be in Brazil. If you want
Yes.
information on that, go to our website. After that, we'll be talking about CPAC Israel
Yes.
and CPAC Mexico in September. But the most important CPAC will be CPAC in Dallas, August 4 through 7. And, sweetheart, the best guest to bring on is someone who we know well and who was just elected to be a member of our board of directors here at ACU, is Kevin Hassett, who's a distinguished visiting fellow at the Hoover Institute, a great organization,
Right.
and of course was a top economic advisor to President Trump as chairman of the President's Council on Economic Advisors. Kevin Hassett, Dr. Kevin Hassett, the Honorable Kevin Hassett, blah, blah, blah.
The super smart Kevin Hassett and our friend.
Thank you for
Thanks
joining us.
Great to be here, guys.
So I had to bring you on the show because I'm reading my Wall Street Journal, which, I very much enjoy reading the Wall Street Journal. I know sometimes you get into a fight with them, Schlapp. But Joe Biden, he has his op-ed, My Plan for Fighting Inflation. And I was like, what does Kevin Hassett think about Joe Biden's plan in fighting this very high inflation that we're seeing impacting everyday Americans?
Joe Biden doesn't have a plan. If you look at the op-ed, then it was sort of a hodgepodge of weird ideas that, for the most part, will have no effect on inflation. Like he, released oil from the Strategic Oil Reserve, but he can't do that again, right? And so whatever effect that was going to have on prices, we've already seen in prices. The fact is that if we were in the White House, then we'd be advising the president to do whatever he can to increase supply, to have supply side tax cuts, maybe embrace reform of long run entitlements so that people are eager to buy our debt because they don't think we're going to be bankrupt in a few years. But really, supply side policies are the only thing that'll save us from inflation on the fiscal policy side. And on that, he was pretty much absent. He did mention deficit reduction, but I think the deficit reduction he has in mind is tax increases, and those will reduce supply and make inflation even worse. We're in a kind of lull right now where inflation paused in April because gas prices went back down. But in May, we already know that they went back up big time. And gasoline inventories right now are about the lowest I've ever seen. And so what we're looking at is a summer of inflation. And Joe Biden's plan isn't going to do anything about it. And, it's sad. There are things that we could do about it, but it's clearly not something that he's being advised correctly on.
Kevin, I know this is maybe something that doesn't just drip off the top of your mind, but since you usually know everything, this big double-digit inflation that we're seeing, how much of it is driven by the cost of fossil fuels? Is it a big driver?
It's a little bit of a driver, but one of the there's been a study out of Morgan Stanley and then another one out of one of the regional Federal Reserve banks that basically says that the main cause of the inflation in the U.S. is Joe Biden's policies, in particular the huge explosion in spending in his first year in office. But there are other things too, like once again. They were, as you remember, when they were Build Back Better, never was there a bill named worse, but Build Back Better, they promised the biggest corporate tax hike in history, right? And so they did all this stuff to sort of tell people, hey, don't open up a new factory here in the U.S., don't move supply to the U.S., you better actually run for the hills because we're going to tax and regulate you within an inch of your life. We even have the Federal Trade Commission, basically going after every company that they think might be price gouging. And so by doing that, what they've done is they've basically made the businesses that employ people and increase the supply of stuff on the shelves, they've made them very wary of expanding. And because of that, demand is, which they fed with all this cash giveaways, the demand has run way ahead of supply. It's simple freshman economics, but apparently it's well beyond the capabilities of the people in the White House.
He does spend a lot of time, Joe Biden, blaming others. In the op-ed, he talks about Putin's, war in Ukraine, the energy markets are in turmoil, supply chains that haven't fully healed are causing shortages and price hikes. He does mention that it's because of his policies that he's seen a robust economic recovery. I mean, I understand that we're seeing unemployment rates at a low percent. You've seen low rates in like 17 of these states, but what's really happening there? And how can he make this claim that Joe Biden his policies have led to a robust economic recovery?
Well, as you know, the previous administration works on a bipartisan basis with Democrats to fill the hole that was dug by the government shutdowns. Now, those government shutdowns, did harm the economy, but the stimulus package fixed the harm. And when Biden took office, we had what Larry Kudlow was talking about on TV every day, a V-shaped recovery. But now Joe Biden has run that economy pretty much into the rocks. One way to look at it is inflation is out of control. But another way is to just look at gross domestic product, the measure of the output of the economy. When you have a recession, gross domestic product declines, and gross domestic product declined in the first quarter of this year by about 1.5%. If we have another negative quarter, that means that we're in recession. So right when Joe Biden's in the Wall Street Journal bragging about this vibrant economy that he's created, we're really on the edge of recession and have already posted a negative quarter. I just can't imagine like how ill-advised it is, how poorly advised he is to go out and give a speech about how vibrant the economy is right after we had a negative report on GDP, something that very, very rarely happens.
But this is something Mercy and I talk about all the time. With all your White House experience, you guys can understand it is very strange. It would be weird to be a Democrat because no matter what they say, they get praise from most of the national media outlets. But if a Republican president came out and said how great the economy was, I remember when George W. Bush did this, for instance, they would just pummel him about how he was so out of touch with the pain that ordinary folks were facing. With these guys, it's as if
we have to sacrifice. Like everyone needs to sacrifice,
and they can talk their way out of it. Now, Kevin, just for historical reference, what was like 1970s was like this parade of horribles economically, and inflation was a huge problem. It's one of the reasons Ronald Reagan was eventually elected in 1980. Was it worse than this? About the same as this? Not as bad? How do we look at that?
We have to wait and see a little bit. But right now, there are many variables that are the worst they've been since World War II. So, for example, small business sentiment is the worst that it's been since World War II. Inflation is not quite as high as it's been in history, but it's really high. Economic growth, if it stays where it is in the first quarter, is going to be about on par with the worst quarters in the sort of Jimmy Carter 70s. You mentioned the George Bush thing, and I just, as an economist, you watch these things closely. I wanted to add just a little bit of flavor to what you said, that there was a recession the year of the election when Bill Clinton was first elected. And George Herbert Walker Bush basically went out and he said, the recession's over. And that was what everybody criticized him for. They
That's
said,
right.
"Oh, come on, you're just like this rich guy who doesn't know what the price of milk is. You don't feel the pain of the ordinary people. Of course, the recession is still going on." And then, of course, Bill Clinton said, "It's the economy, stupid." Right? Remember that? And
Yes.
and because the stupid was, of course, Herbert Walker Bush, George Bush Senior. That Bill Clinton was, calling him stupid because he was saying that we were out of recession. Well, if you go back and look, in the third quarter of that year, GDP growth was about 3%. So the recession had ended. Bush was correct. But, the media rode his sort of assertion that the recession was over all the way to Bill Clinton being elected on it's the economy stupid agenda. And so it sort of shows like the kind of bias you saw against President Trump and the bias that we see every day against Republicans is something that's really hardwired into our system. And it's, again, something you guys and I have talked about it, that I write extensively about in my book, The Drift, Stopping America's Slide to Socialism. These people are trying to drive us to socialism. And one of the ways they've done it is with the control of the media.
Well, they're trying to drive us to socialism. They're trying to drive us to buy electric vehicles because God only knows the gas prices are so incredibly high. And I think you bring up a good point, which I think we need to analyze here, is that the media's narrative, they're so gentle on Biden when it comes to the economy. They do explain the pain that American families are going through, but they barely put the blame on Joe Biden. You're seeing Joe Biden basically say he's going to go on this economic tour with several of his cabinet members, trying to say things are actually not that bad. I think that's kind of the messaging points that they're going to push out. Do you think they can convince the American people that things are not that bad?
No, and I think the American people, the American voters, will recognize that they're in denial. In fact, if they were not in denial, what they would do is forget about me. There are a number of economists that have served previous administrations that have been highly critical of Joe Biden. Larry Summers comes to mind. And Larry Summers and I have disagreed a lot about a lot of things, but he still understands supply and demand. He saw this inflation coming. He's been very critical of Joe Biden's policies. If Joe Biden were serious about trying to change the really terrible trajectory of the U.S. economy right now, he'd assemble a commission of guys like Larry Summers and bring them together and say, "Hey guys, what should we do?" But instead, they come in with all the confidence, of people who haven't really thought clearly enough about what they're doing. Whenever you're dealing with economic policy, you need to be incredibly wary and risk averse because economies are so complex. But they've got all the confidence of the world that they know what to do, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And I think it's going to continue to get worse and worse until basically there's a midterm election that makes it clear that Build Back Better, those massive tax hikes, and all the things that Biden has promised are not going to happen.
But the thing that, Kevin, the thing that I keep getting focused on, and I don't have the economic background you do, which is if I were advising this president and he actually could understand what I was saying, that's one scenario. But they really don't, when inflation is going at this rate and your policies are adverse to any kind of economic turnaround,
right,
they really don't have a way out. So your hope is to say, yeah, there's no public policy way out if they stay on the path they're on. The only hope is that the American people wake them up by a drubbing at the election box. But even then, I see this spinning of, well, this is what happens in a president's first term. I could see them just kind of blowing off the law, saying, well, presidents really take a toll in their first midterm.
Well, we'll see how bad it is, but my expectation is that it'll be the worst midterm that we've ever seen for a party in power, and it's because they've messed so much up. Don't forget about Afghanistan. I don't think that Putin would have invaded Ukraine. It's my opinion if there were a stronger president in the White House. So there's so many places where they failed. Maybe they could get their act together. I would guess that what Joe Biden's doing right now, he's meeting today with the Federal Reserve chairman, is that he's kind of hoping that the Federal Reserve policy can get inflation under control before the election. I'm highly confident that it won't be able to. But by embracing Jay Powell the way he has, I think what he has done for the political season is given himself another person to blame, right? And so we're already blaming Vladimir Putin and gosh knows who else for the problems here in the U.S. And if inflation stays where it is, then he'll start blaming Jay Powell as well in the fall.
Be careful, Kevin Hassett. He might blame you next. But stay with us. We're going to be right back with more with Kevin Hassett. Welcome back to America Uncanceled. Joining us on the show, we always love to get his insight. A new ACU board member. This is so exciting for us, Kevin Hassett. Kevin, we were having this great discussion about, well, I shouldn't say great, because you talked about the summer of inflation. It sounds pretty depressing. And then now we're talking about a possible recession. What's your prediction? You really were, I remember we were having these discussions last year, and you were like, we're going to hit 7% when it comes to inflation. We're going to hit 8%. When you're looking at the final quarter, when you're looking at getting into that November, December timeframe, where can we expect the economy to be? How do American families prepare for what's happening now and what could happen in these next few months?
It's more likely than not that when Americans go to vote in November, that the U.S. economy will be in a recession, and that it will be widely recognized to be in a recession. And the way to think about it is that with inflation at 8.5%, if your wage goes up 6%, then you've lost 2.5% of spending power. Your real income has gone down by 2.5%. For the typical American, their real incomes are declining at about that rate over the last year. But we haven't tipped exactly into recession because Joe Biden mailed so many checks to everybody that they've been able to continue to buy things, even though their incomes in real terms are down. But that extra cash that they got from the government last year is running out. Basically, the savings rate, the dissavings rate in the U.S. is the highest it's been since right before the great financial crisis. And so people don't have the wherewithal to withstand this high inflation. And the way to think about it, it's really, really simple, is if you go to the store and you spend $10 on apples and they're $1 a piece, then you get 10 apples. If the apples are $10 a piece, then you get 1 apple. The real output or the real spending for Americans is how many apples they get, not how many dollars that they spend. And so right now, Americans are spending a lot on things, but getting way less. And in fact, Mercy, I know you go to the grocery store, I go to the grocery store. I was just at a not fancy grocery store, and we were getting ready for our holiday weekend barbecue, and the hamburger was about $7 a pound. I bought, because I didn't want to have to cut up a watermelon, I just bought like a tub of watermelon that's already cut up. They sell that.
Right.
I forgot to look at the price. When I checked out, it was $18.
Oh my gosh, watermelon.
I'm just saying that the prices of things. And then I stopped, this really happened. Then I stopped to fill up my car on the way back, and the gas was $6 a gallon. And then I get home and I want to unload my stuff into my fridge. But I can't because my power's out. And I don't want to open the fridge and have it get like all the cold go out. And so I literally, this is Joe Biden's America. And Americans are going through this. There's going to be gasoline shortages this summer. The gasoline inventories are about as low as we've seen. You've seen what's happened with baby formula. That's going to happen to other things. Other countries are so wary of the food shortage that 20-something countries around the world have banned the export of food, even India, because everybody's getting ready for a famine or something because of the absence of Ukraine's production in the global marketplace. And so against that backdrop, there's just, I think, little chance that the U.S. recovers in a meaningful way before the election. And it's certainly, it could if you had somebody in charge with good ideas for what to do about all this. But it's not going to with Joe Biden there, as far as I can tell.
Kevin, you brought up the midterm elections. I know covering races is fun for you. It's not how you spend most of your time, but I'm really interested in your take on it because I keep praying that the Democratic Party comes back to its senses and realizes the Green New Deal AOC version of itself is not a successful version of itself, and the Bill Clinton version of itself is a more successful path for them. Do you think the midterms will be so catastrophically awful for them that there's just a chance that the Democratic, graybeards get together and say, you know what, at least when we sounded moderate, we did better? Is there a chance of that?
Yeah, there's a long history of really, great economic policy making in the Democratic Party, believe it or not. There have been, some people that were on the wrong side of economics, but some people that were on the right side. John F. Kennedy ran on tax cuts. He was a supply side. Deregulation. A lot of people credit Ronald Reagan for being the father of deregulation, but it was actually Jimmy Carter. You go back and look, Jimmy Carter was an aggressive deregulator. He did other things not so well, but he believed in deregulation. Bill Clinton said the era of big government is over. That those people, I think, genuinely, earnestly believed the things that they were doing and advocating at the time. And I can't believe they're all gone. And the thing is, we have to kind of ask ourselves, what's it going to take for reasonable, moderate people in the Democratic Party to take over their party again? And I think you're right that a drubbing tends to have a chilling effect on people. But it's really important for the future of America that happened. We have a government that basically only functions when there are reasonable people that are willing to deal with one another. And if we just have this far left Democratic Party that, without a supermajority for Republicans in Congress, then we're going to be stuck with these terrible policies that we've got right now and not be able to fix them. And I really worry about how long the downturn might be then.
So, Kevin, let me ask you, I read an article today about China's severe slowdown from an economic standpoint. What does that mean for the global markets, and how does that impact the American economy?
Right. So China's had this really bizarre zero COVID policy. And so you could look at things like subway traffic, in Shanghai went to pretty much zero. Auto traffic in Beijing is pretty much at zero. So they basically told everybody to shelter in place because of COVID, which is kind of weird because with the vaccines, COVID is not nearly as deadly as we feared back in the beginning. But the Chinese economy is, really doing as badly as it's ever done in a really long time. You have to go back to like Mao to start to see, the economy heading in the direction that it's heading right now. And my view is that they're going to open up and then they'll have a V-shaped recovery and everything will be kind of back to normal. But the argument on the other side is that President Xi might be in trouble. That, when an economy heads this far south, and he made so many enemies by, basically taking all the high-tech titans of China and putting them in jail, things like that, there are a lot of people with knives out for President Xi. And if China ends up in turmoil, then, the downturn that we're seeing right now would just be the start of something much, much worse. But China's economy right now is very, very weak. What that also means for us is that Chinese imports are going to be really, really cheap because they're desperate to get whatever cash they can. And so whatever consumption growth we get here in the U.S. is probably going to be coming out of imports, which isn't going to really help us avoid a recession.
Kevin, we said at the beginning of the show that you've joined the board of CPAC, which we greatly appreciate you.
That raises the IQ like super duper high. I mean, the board members have super high IQ.
She just offended all of my board members.
No. It just adds. It adds.
That's better. It's additive.
There you go.
But Kevin, when I was in Hungary, we did several interviews while I was on the ground, and I got to reacquaint myself with John O'Sullivan, who was the longtime editor of National Review. We talked about, it was interesting, we talked about William F. Buckley in the takeover of Hong Kong, Margaret Thatcher in the takeover of Hong Kong, the fight to keep Britain's currency, the relationship between Reagan and Thatcher. You're somebody with a long association with the National Review. You're going to help bring CPAC up to an even better level of performance. It was wonderful to have John on the show with us. Give us your kind of quick historical perspective of where the conservative movement goes from here in America.
Right. Well, I think that one of the interesting things is that CPAC and National Review were founded by Buckley at about the same time, right?
That's
and
right.
Buckley was one of the group, and the conservative movement would have died over and over if it wasn't for these two organizations, and that's why I'm really glad to be associated with both. And I think that one of the things that has to happen for conservatives is that they need to unite. And so if you think about all the genuinely conservative people who became never Trumpers, they really enabled Joe Biden's presidency. And so conservatives need to focus, on coalescing around ideas and arguing with one another, but then reaching a consensus and moving forward, because our country can't take a divided conservative movement. If you get it, then you get Joe Biden. I could say one last little tidbit is that the Buckley Prize dinner is going to be at the Reagan Library in the fall. And I hope you guys come, because the Buckley Prize is going to be given to Larry Kudlow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Good to see.
That's
They're already making better
wonderful.
decisions. Yes, we would be honored to be there, and we might have a bunch of children sitting at our table. But
you mean our children?
Yeah, Kevin, yes, it is what I meant.
I was thinking Kevin should become our kids' math tutor for crying. After he was explaining the apples versus the dollars, I'm like, oh my goodness, I could use a lot of help in the math department.
But Kevin, it was an interesting relationship between National Review and CPAC for many years, and then I remember getting called by National Review in 2016 asking me to contribute an article towards their now infamous Never Trump edition, and I had a good conversation with the editor, and I explained to him that I would essentially be saying Hillary Clinton should be president.
Right.
And I could, of course, never do that. And we had a respectful conversation back and forth, but I would like to revisit, what does Hillary Clinton even say? Reset that relationship and talk about these great things we have in common, because you're right.
That's what we have to reimagine the relationship.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, you'll help us do that.
Well, but I can tell you that President Trump is, on the phone with senior people at National Review quite a bit. I hear feedback from those phone calls. So I think that there's been a lot of healing in that space.
Well, we really appreciate you joining the board. We appreciate everything you do to educate us on really these dire times that we're in.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's important for our viewers to know what to expect, what we're looking, and the economic analysis behind it. Who better to give us the best analysis on the economy than Kevin Hassett? Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on America Uncanceled.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you all for watching. And remember to follow us on our social media channels at @mschlapp, @Mercedes at CPAC. And remember, CPAC Texas is coming in early August 4th through the 7th.
That's right.
So get ready to register, and we're going to have phenomenal speakers, another great national conference happening this year, because we just are getting too big. And it's just so wonderful. And it's grassroots activists like yourselves that inspire us every day to do the great work that we're doing here at CPAC. So God bless and thank you.